For those who don't know exactly who I am, I'm Miquel Banchs-Piqué. I just finished my PhD in future scenarios in Portsmouth in the School of Civil Engineering and Surveying. And well, with this presentation, I will explain you what the future scenarios are. So I will explain you what future scenarios are and a particular use they can have. So as Gisela said, at the end, there will be plenty of time for discussions and questions. So if you have any doubt, you can ask it then. And yeah, I numbered the slides so that if you want to go back to specific slide, it's easy to go. So yeah, I will start by briefly, well, not briefly, but by explaining you the basics of future scenarios. Then I will tell you how they can be used to improve the resiliency of urban developments. And finally, I will tell you how this could be used to extend, so how we can extend the use of these tools to improve the resilience of off-world settlements as well. But before I do, imagine you've won the lottery. Yeah. What do you do? So you probably buy that house, the one which is designed to maximize solar access to keep it warm and bright. With this design, you need to spend much less energy and it is very cozy. The project is well done. They have made sure that there are no high buildings planned in the surrounding areas that could shadow the house in the future. Okay, let's now jump forward in time. It's 2050. In this scenario, the city is well planned and organized, and the regulations are enforced. You are enjoying the warmth and sunlight in your home, and very importantly, saving a lot of energy. But maybe not. Who knows what the future will bring, right? This is a much messier scenario. All plans and regulations tend to be overlooked, and market is what drives development. High buildings were constructed and shadow your house. Your home is not cozy anymore, and your energy consumption skyrockets. Well, scenarios have many uses, and this kind of analysis is only one of them. Depending on the use they are designed to have, scenarios can have different characteristics and degrees of detail. But what's a future scenario? I bet that you have an idea of what scenario is, at least broadly, because this concept, scenario, is used in media, in companies, in governments, and we also use it sometimes in the daily life. And especially now, since almost 1 year, governments and scientists use scenarios to map plausible ways out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The OECD defines future scenarios as carefully constructed snapshots of the future and the possible ways a sector might develop. Then they immediately continue by explaining their use. Scenarios help us focus thinking on the most important factors driving change in a particular field. By considering the complex interactions between these factors, we can improve our understanding of how change works and what can we do to guide it. This explanation is a good indicator that the importance of future scenarios heavily lays on their use rather than on the formalities of what their exact definition or form are. And precisely because almost everyone has an idea of what scenarios are, it is also critical to emphasize that what scenarios are not in order to dissipate any misconception. So, scenarios are not forecasts or predictions. Neither are they recommendations, and they explicitly do not include trend analysis. Did I say that scenarios are not forecasts or predictions? This is something important, and this is a really common mistake that I want to make clear. They are not predictions. They are not forecasts. I just wanted to leave that clear. Okay, what scenarios do is to map a plausibility space and help us explore it. Notice that I use the word plausible, not probable. So they map a plausibility space. Their purpose is to place yourself into distinct environments to explore what they mean for your analysis, or maybe to test and understand the performance of your solutions, of your interests under these different conditions. The scenarios used in the futures studies are typically told in words and numbers, as Raskin describes it. That means that they are described by a narrative storyline with quantitative and qualitative information. They explore distinct, plausible economic, social, cultural, institutional, political, security, technological, and/or environmental aspects of the futures that could arise from the present. When scenarios are carefully built and coherent, their events unfold guided by the narrative and of their logical plot. Here, it is important to say that it's actually crucial to say that in order for them to be useful, scenarios must be coherent. If not, they won't give you reliable information. And one of the key features of scenarios is that although they introduce multiple futures, they simplify the analysis of the future instead of making it more complicated. This may seem paradoxical, right? But their internal logic acts like what is called a complexity reduction device. This segments the complexity into distinct, concrete, and coherent narratives. This pushes uncertainty across distinct futures rather than within a single one. So you don't know what the future that will come. You don't know what it will be. But you can easily understand the logic of the distinct plausible futures. And yes, this allows you to further inquiry by asking what if questions. And it also helps you to derive new information or to understand the consequences of your solutions. These consequences actually could very easily be overlooked in abstract discussions and analysis. So scenarios make it sure that you don't overlook them. So you probably know this quote from Donald Rumsfeld. He says that there are known knowns. There are also known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns. These are the things that we do not know that we do not know, right? Scenario analysis helps us to identify unknown unknowns, and it also helps us to ask unasked questions. In addition, one important feature of scenarios is that they convert the danger of self-fulfilling prophecies into a strength. So anticipating a range of futures enables us to produce roadmaps and to align our decisions to choose the desired one. So in summary, future scenarios are tools for thinking about the future in a structured way and based on a set of assumptions. Now I will give you a brief comment for those of you who like the philosophy of science. There is much disagreement about whether scenarios and foresight in general can be considered scientific or not. On the one hand, scenarios are thought experiments. They do not deal with reality. Therefore, their findings cannot be empiric. Although scenarios may and should be grounded in well-established facts, it refers to possible developments, some of which, by definition, will never exist. But on the other hand, the process of scenario analysis is systematic and provides an increased understanding of the future. This means that rather than providing direct answers to a problem, scenarios help us to evaluate the problem in a rational way. This disagreement actually links directly with the definition of scenarios from the OECD that I gave you before. Regardless the theoretical and philosophical details, the point of using scenarios is that it is a very useful exercise which can improve the world in tangible ways. Okay, so far I told you about what scenarios are, why they are useful, concepts and theory behind them, but now let me tell you shortly about their typical architecture. The typical architecture of future scenarios is the following. They are normally described by a short general narrative plus the characteristics of a given set of indicators. The general narrative briefly and precisely describes or reflects the main characteristics of each scenario, and their details are conveyed by the characteristics of the indicators. This set of indicators is the same for the whole set of scenarios. What's different is their characteristics. And these characteristics are normally relative to a base scenario, which usually reflects the present at the time when the scenarios were developed. These indicators are just attributes of the system, any attribute. For example, the type of government, the percentage of people above certain age, the size of the population in the scenario, or even how many people would like to go to Nuba, anything. The differences in their characteristics is what differentiate the scenarios. For example, in one scenario, the population may increase 20%. In another one, it may decrease by 5%, and in another one, it may stay relatively constant. Okay, although scenarios normally share this architecture, they are not all the same. There are at least two main types of scenarios, and these are the biggest ones: normative and explorative. Normative scenarios usually involve some business as usual scenario and variations around it. They may focus sorry, they may focus in one or two aspects and analyze how they can evolve. These scenarios are commonly used to identify preferable futures or to respond to specific problems. Explorative scenarios, on the other hand, portray a broad range of plausible futures. They may extend to the extremes of plausibility to offer a complete view of what may unfold in the future, and they may include radical shifts in social or cultural conditions that we unconsciously assume to be fixed. These are the scenarios we are interested in because they can be used to test any solution, to test if any solution will continue to deliver its intended benefits for the duration of their lifespan in a wide range of future conditions. Okay, this introduction to future scenarios gave me the basis to tell you about improving the resilience of urban designs. Why we would why we would want to do such a thing? Well, it's very clear, right? Um, if you make sure that urban assets deliver their intended benefits throughout their lifespan, you will save a lot of effort and resources like money, time, materials, and so on. And in addition, you may avoid that these assets generate future unintended consequences or disasters. Okay, the why was easy. Now let's go to the how. How can we use scenarios to improve the resilience of urban designs? The concept is actually pretty simple. If you have a set of explorative scenarios that extend to the limits of plausibility, again, this means that they offer a complete view of what is plausible. So if you have such a set of scenarios, then you can analyze if your design or your solution would perform well in all of them. This is something similar to the example I gave you at the beginning of my presentation, but in detail, in a systematic way, and with a broader set of scenarios. After such an analysis, you will know how your design or solution performs under a broad range of distinct conditions. And if it doesn't work in some circumstances, you will know why. This will allow you to decide between either use the new information you have to adapt the solution, or you could improve the design or take measures to mitigate its drawbacks, or you could start over and consider a totally different solution, or there is still another option, which is just go forward with your design, either because it performed well, or knowing that when and why it could stop working and accepting the risk. So, in 2012, a project called Urban Futures released a toolkit to do precisely this kind of analysis. This tool was aimed at helping urban designers analyze the resilience of sustainability solutions being implemented in the UK. This toolkit is called Designing Resilient Cities, and I will refer to it as DRC from now on. DRC included a set of explorative scenarios describing urban UK in 2050 and the method to perform the analysis. They called this method Urban Futures method, of course. Urban Futures adapted a set of very, very well-researched scenarios to urban UK in 2050. These scenarios had a pedigree of more than 20 years, so they are very well established. In their effort to adapt these scenarios, Urban Futures characterized, mostly quantitatively, around 90 indicators. The scenarios portray four different socioeconomic futures that follow trends we currently see in different parts of the world today. The details of the scenarios are not relevant now, but you may like to know that the images I showed you in the beginning represent two of them. The Urban Futures method aims to broaden the way we think about urban development and by focusing on the long-term performance of today's urban design solutions and their associated vulnerabilities. It consists in these four steps. The first one is to identify a solution-benefit pair. This means that if your solution or design has more than one benefit, this process has to be followed for each benefit. The same if your design presents more than one solution. You have to repeat the analysis for all of them. The second step is to identify the necessary conditions for the solution benefit pair to work. This can be a research-intensive step because these conditions may lay outside the expertise of the designing team. The third step is to determine the performance of the necessary conditions in each scenario. With this, potential vulnerabilities of your design in specific scenarios may be identified. And the fourth step is to determine the resilience of the solution pair in the future scenarios. Here, the potential benefits are weighted against the overall performance and the importance of the necessary conditions. With this information, then one can decide whether to implement the solution, to improve it, or to consider an alternative. An express version of this kind of analysis is what I did at the beginning of the presentation. The solution I analyzed was a design maximizing the solar access of a house. The benefits were that this design keeps the house warm and bright for free. One necessary condition for this to work is that the house needs to have solar access. And I found that a significant vulnerability appeared in one scenario. In the scenario where high buildings were shadowing the house. With this information, I could be able to decide what to do. Maybe I could go for a totally different design, which does not rely on solar access. Or maybe I could buy some land around the house to make sure that there cannot be a high building constructed there. Or I could accept the risk and go forward with my project. Okay, but in order to perform this kind of analysis, we need the scenarios convey all the information we need. So, as I said before, Urban Futures adapted very well-researched scenarios. These scenarios were really very detailed, and their details were both global and disaggregated to 11 regions. However, none of the regions corresponded to UK, and much less to urban UK. That's why Urban Futures had to adapt. Another example is the work I did for my PhD. Although I did not use the Urban Futures method, I used their scenarios to analyze the future of household energy demand in UK. And although the scenarios describe many characteristics of the households and the way they use energy, I needed them to convey details in more aspects than what they did. So therefore, I had to supplement the scenarios as well. Okay, that was it for the Earth. Let's now jump to space. First of all, why should we want to improve the resilience of world developments? Well, that's easy again, right? As you know, the same reasons apply here than before, and the importance is multiplied by a lot. But there's another reason as well. On Earth, if we mess it up once, we can learn from the mistake and probably repair or make up for the problem and improve subsequent attempts. This may not be the case in off-world development. Any failure could be disastrous there. The stakes are very high. In addition, and this is very important, they are also expensive and controversial, that they are prone to be discontinued if a significant failure occurs, particularly at their first stages. This could delay any prospect of world settlements for decades at best, or maybe even forever at worst. And now let's go to the how. Sorry, this is a bit more difficult here. If we want a tool similar to designing resilient cities, but for off-world developments, we need the relevant information. Urban Futures had to adapt the details of those very well-researched scenarios, but they could heavily rely on their refined structure and their general plot. This is something we cannot do for off-world scenarios, as the uncertainties in space are much greater and broad than on Earth. This dramatically increases the degrees of freedom that we face when we produce the scenarios. One idea to overcome this problem that I would like to explore is to produce layers of different of domain-specific scenarios instead of a set of full scenarios. So this should make it easier to extend analysis to the extremes of plausibility without introducing too much complexity. So, but in addition, whatever the form of the scenarios is, the method will have to be adapted to them and to space as well. And yes, this means that there's a lot of work to be done. But we have to start at the beginning. The crucial first step is to find, define, and refine the key uncertainties of that off-world developments may face. Luckily, a forum like SONET is the perfect place to start this work. And to wrap up, I want to stress the take-home messages of this presentation. The first one is that future scenarios help thinking about the future in a structured way. This allows you to consider the consequences that may easily have been overlooked otherwise. The second one is that it is possible to future-proof earthly designs with a simple method. With that, huge amounts of efforts and resources can be saved. And the third point is that we can make it possible to future-proof off-world designs as well by adapting the previous method to space. This needs a lot of work, but SONET is the place to do it. And yes, before starting the discussion, I wanted to tell you that with my supervisor in Portsmouth, Mark Gatterell, we are searching for funding to carry out the project of adapting DRC to off-world settlements. If you know of any funding call that could be adequate for such a project, or any general junior postdoc funding position, please let me know. I am actually now in the process to apply to the funding call Guillaume advertised some days ago in the Discord server. And to wrap up, I leave you with this very fitting quote from Mark Twain. I hope the presentation was somehow instructive and not too boring, and I look forward to the discussion.